to show you how to prepare a Canva file for home printing. So let's get to it. Okay, so here we are in Canva, and we're going to be working with just a simple flyer design. So you can see here, this is a flyer that I created advertising an upcoming in-person class that I'm teaching. So right now I have my elements all the way to the edge of my page. So there's no white space in between the picture or this little line right here. So there's two different methods for home printing depending on the type of printer that you have. If your printer prints to the edge, it's super simple, but if your printer does not print to the edge, then it takes a little bit of extra effort, and I will show you how. So when a printer prints to the edge, it means that whenever you print something, there will be no white margin in between your design and the edge of the page. So basically all you have to do is just make sure that your elements extend all the way to the edge of this page here, and you're good to go. You don't want to include a bleed, because if you do the download and include crop marks and bleed, your file is likely going to shrink down in order for your printer to accommodate that bleed. So bleed only applies if you're printing at Vistaprint or another professional printer that doesn't print on the actual size of the design. So for example, when you have business cards printed, Vistaprint doesn't print on that specific, 2.5 by 3 inch piece of paper. They print a bunch of different designs on a larger piece of paper. So the crop marks and bleed help the printer to cut down the design, so to fit as many on one page as they can, and then cut them down later. So the bleed and the crop marks allow the printer to print precisely and allows for a little bit of wiggle room just in case they print a little bit off. But with home printing, you are printing on the physical sheet of paper that you designed to. So in this case, we're printing on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. Now, if you do have multiple designs on a file, or let's say you have a smaller file and you want to print it on an 8.5 by 11, check out my tutorial how to print multiple designs to a single page in Canva. I will link to it down below. And I also have a tutorial on how to print awkwardly sized designs on Canva. So let's say you don't want to print multiple designs to a single page, but you have a kind of a weird in-between size design and you want to print it on 8.5 by 11 or something like that. I will link to those tutorials down below. So anyway, with printing on a printer that prints to the edge, just again, make sure that your elements are to the edge and you're good to go. You're going to click download, make sure the file type is PDF print, and then you're just going to select the page. I have a few different flyers, so just make sure that you select the page that you want to print and then download, and you're good to go to print. So let's say that your printer does not print to the edge. This is the default for most printers. I'm not sure the mechanics behind it, but basically printers leave a 1/2 inch margin around the page because they just physically cannot print a design to the edge of the page. Now, if you end up having a design printed at Staples, this is also likely the case. So what's going to happen is if you download this file and you print it, your printer is going to shrink down the design to accommodate for that 1/2 inch or so margin, which sounds fine. However, not only will this photo and this line be printed, everything shrunk. Everything here is going to be shrunk. So your text, you may really like the text size, but it's likely that it's going to shrink. So in order for that to not happen, what you want to do is make sure that all of your elements fit within that 1/2 inch margin, which is also called the safety area if you are using a professional printer. So basically, Canva has some really awesome guides that you can take advantage of. So right now what we're going to do is we're just going to shrink down this, and then we're going to make sure, do you see that guide that comes up? That's what we want to work with. Yes, I know it's a huge margin. It's really frustrating, but you got to work with what you have. So make sure that your design fits within that margin. There we go. And then you can just play around with it. And then for a photo, you can adjust the crop and all of that. Okay, so now we know that this is the edge of our page. So you'll notice that the text here is beyond that edge. So we're going to want to bring it in. Basically, you're treating this as the new edge of your design. And you also want to leave some breathing room. You never want to have your elements to the very edge of the page unless they're a picture or a line, because you want to have a bit of white space. It just makes it so much easier for the brain to scan, and it makes the design more visually appealing. So I'm actually going to shrink this down, and what you can do is you can shrink like this, or you can just reduce the font size. Now, a lot of people tend to make fonts too large because when you're seeing it on screen, you're not seeing it at 100%. So a trick here, let me move myself. You can zoom in on your design to 100% and kind of get a gist of, wow, okay, this font's really large. I don't need it to be that big. So you can shrink it down even more if you'd like. And I always recommend printing one test print, because what we see here still doesn't give you the best look of how it's going to appear. So make sure you print one test print and just check your font sizes, make sure they're readable and not too big. So I'm going to zoom out a bit. So the rule of thumb is you don't want anything below 12-point font, but that really depends on the font. So for example, this font is 11.8, but it still looks okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag in the actual window itself, because I don't really want the font to go any smaller, and you'll see it automatically pushes the text in, and it may end up shifting something to another line. So what you can do instead of shrinking the font size is go to not effects. Sometimes I get confused. There's so many options. You're going to go to the spacing button, and you're going to shrink down the letter spacing, which is literally the gap in between your letters. And what that does is you'll see that the letters are moving closer together, so it shrinks down your window. And then you can do the same thing with line spacing. So this allows you to keep your font size the same. So let's call that good. And then I'm just going to scooch these in just so there is breathing room. And then I want to make sure that this aligns. You can kind of see there we go. There we go. Okay. So now we're going to want to shrink. What we're going to want to do is we're going to want to move all of this up. So we're probably going to have to shrink everything a little bit more, or we can reduce the size of this photo. So basically what it takes is a lot of going back and forth. And how your file is going to look will be similar to this. I didn't fully shrink it down to the appropriate margins. I just kind of took a little shortcut and printed it as is, and it shrunk a little bit more than I wanted it to, so I really should have pulled it down to the margins. But anyway, you see this white gap all the way around, and what you can do is if you want, you can just cut the edge off. You won't have a full 8.5 by 11 that way, but at least you'll have your elements to the very edge. Now, what happens if you are a digital print creator and you sell digital prints on Etsy? You're likely using standard frame sizes like an 8 by 10. So an 8 by 10 design does print on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. So if you're delivering that design to someone, if you just send them the 8 by 10 file, when they print it, it's either, depending on the printer will adjust the size and automatically make that fill the full page. Or what I would recommend doing is, if you know that most of your customers are using their home printers, create a 4-print file as well as a digital only file. So the 4-print file, you would just take your design, put it on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and you can add, if you want, a little border around it to show people where to cut things. I get questions about that a lot for people creating prints for Etsy, so I just thought I'd mention that. So if you missed the earlier part of this video, let's say that you have a design that doesn't fit on a standard sheet of paper. It's an awkwardly sized design. I have a tutorial for how to print those, as well as how to print a bunch of smaller size designs on a single page. I will link to those down below. So when you're ready to print, you're going to click this download button. You're going to make sure that PDF print is selected. And if you're like me and you have multiple designs on a single file, you're going to make sure that you select the page that you want to print. Make sure to leave crop marks and bleed unchecked, because if you add that, then your printer will be given a file that's slightly larger and it will automatically shrink it down. So you want to make sure that that is unchecked. And then you'll click download and print and you're good to go. So again, this is very different if you are using a professional printer like Vistaprint. I have a tutorial for that linked down below as well. With professional printing, you do want to include a bleed as well as crop marks. Most printers require crop marks, some don't, but that tutorial will explain how to do it. So this tutorial was all about how to prepare a Canva design for home printing. I hope it helped. Again, I will link to a bunch of relevant tutorials down below. And if you have any questions, feel free to let me know in the comments. To learn even more about Canva, including design principles, how to make eye-catching designs that people will not want to look away from, and how to use Canva, because there are just so many features, check out my online mini course, Create with Canva. I will link to that down below as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.